Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's chat, the discussion about The Leftovers Season 3. As a whole, I am joined here by Akton Tamko, of course, my brother, friend of the channel, who's done his own Leftovers review, so very happy to be able to hash out the season as a whole and, of course, this big finale. So, Akton, thanks for joining.
Hello, thank you guys for joining us. Sorry that we couldn't make our originally scheduled date. I couldn't talk on Thursday. I lost my voice, but and talking is important for this video. So we want to talk about The Leftovers and this amazing season. We'll talk about where it ranks as far as seasons go, even amongst Leftovers or seasons amongst all shows, but really, truly amazing season, and I can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, and it is great that you actually have your voice back. So that's good. Cool. So yeah, let's just start with our feelings about The Leftovers season 3 overall as a whole, and I'll let you go first, Akton. What did you think of season 3 of The Leftovers?
Well, I kind of was just talking about it already. I do think this is one of I thought it was pretty much perfection. I mean, there's always a little bit of flaws here and there with everything, but it's as close to perfect as any TV season can get. And I'm just going to flat out, and we'll talk about this more later on, but I'm going to flat out say that I think that this was the best season of The Leftovers, and it beats season 2 automatically because of that bad Matt episode in season 2. And there was nothing like that in season 3. So that's why, to me, season 3 was the best season of The Leftovers, hands down. And if I were to concoct like a top 10 seasons of all time, like you did with Josh and Willie a while back, it would be up there. It would be up. I don't know where it would rank, but it would be up there. I think I'm truly blown away by the season. I was just, one episode after the other, just blown away. So, I have a very high opinion of season 3 of The Leftovers.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Like my opinion isn't quite as high, although I still did really love this season. When I did the announcement video announcing that you were sick, so we had to postpone delay. I mentioned I'm glad it's for the delay, so it gives me time to think about where I think season 3 ranks for me. And I actually came to the conclusion that I like season 2 slightly better. And I totally get what you're saying. And that was what made it hard for me to decide between the two seasons. This is the Matt episode in season 2. Because season 3 didn't have a Matt episode or any episode that was nearly as bad as that. So if it wasn't for that Matt episode, season 2 would be the clear winner for me. But because of that, it was a lot harder for me to. But ultimately, I decided that season 2 had a lot of great moments that made me blew my mind than season 3. Even though season 3 is more consistently good, I thought season 2 had a lot of just overall moments that just blew me away and just totally blew my socks off, more so than season 3. And with the season 3 finale, I liked it. It was good, but for me, the season 2 finale more blew me away. It was more shocking, or I don't know, just more energizing than the season 3, where the season 3 was just more, I guess you would call, thoughtful. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I just preferred the season 2. It's just my feelings on it.
Cool.
All right, cool. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get right into. First, I want to do this sort of backwards, because I want to start off with talking about the finale, because the finale was forefront on their minds, is what I've been thinking of all week. And so we'll start with the finale, sort of work backwards with some of the episodes that we haven't covered yet, because we did a mid-season discussion, covered the first half of the season, so we won't talk about that as much as the second half of the season. So with the finale, I have to make a correction, and because the video I made for the finale, I talked about how it was 3 possibilities of what was actually going on, but then I read like interviews with the show creators, mainly Damon Lindelof and some other sort of cast interviews and stuff, and they heavily implied there's actually only two possibilities, where I thought it was sort of more open to interpretation to a wide number of possibilities. Like, okay, so the three I brought up in my video was either, everything that happens is taken at face value, Nora went into this, a departure world or whatever, whatever you want to call it. And the second possibility is she's lying. She's made that whole story up. And then I brought up this third possibility, which I actually didn't make up myself. I actually watched some other videos, and they brought up this possibility. I was like, that's interesting. Is that everything in this finale is like Nora died. It's her afterlife. It's her hotel. And that's sort of the theory that the Damon Lindelof is sort of, not directly, but sort of implied is not actually a possibility. And watching some other, because very few other actually reviewers bring up this possibility, so that actually it wasn't too surprising to me that that's been kind of ruled out. But then I've gotten comments where they brought up some other, I had heard some other really interesting theories, like maybe everyone who survived the departure is actually dead the whole time and this was their afterlife. And then another commenter brought up this interesting theory, which actually is still plausible, that Nora, when she went into this departure world, that was her hotel, and she came back to life with that. But then there's some sort of issues with that. But anyway, I want to talk about this article with Damon Lindelof a lot. It was uploaded on Uprocks. It was an article done by Alan Sepinwall, and it was very interesting. And actually, after reading the article, that made me appreciate the finale less. And it's not because they've ruled out the possibility I was sort of leaning towards. It was more to do with the fact that it wasn't as open to interpretation and as interpretive as I had suspected. And also, it brings up the fact that if you rule out the afterlife possibility and saying either Nora is lying or telling the truth, and that's the only ambiguity to the episode, then that brings up two flaws for me in the episode. And one is one that you mentioned in your video, Afkin, but I've been talking long enough. I want to get some of your thoughts first before I go on any further on the finale.
I had heard the afterlife possibility mentioned and immediately dismissed it. I was surprised that you were bought into it. Honestly, I thought it was way too much of a stretch. I didn't even think it was a possibility. So when Damon Lindelof says, "Oh no, there's only two possibilities," I'm not surprised, because that's what I got out of watching that episode, that there was only really two possibilities, that either she was lying or she wasn't. And I just thought the afterlife thing was, and you did, when you talked about it in your video, you made some really good points, like the fact that she was in the whole scene with her in the bathroom and trying to get out of the bathroom, and how that could be interpreted as her remembering the moment of her death being in that machine. And that's very valid. Although I just think there's hundreds of other ways to look at that too, which I think it definitely relates to that scene with the machine. I don't think it has to be her death. So, I mean, there was just, and also just Kevin's behavior. I think that's probably the thing you were just talking about that you have a problem with now that you know that it's the afterlife, because it was weird. But I never thought that was an indication of the afterlife, because he was clearly lying about showing the photo to the nun. I mean, he showed the photo to the nun of Nora, and so when he was telling that whole story, he was definitely lying. There was also the part where maybe I'm the only one who interpreted it this way, but when Nora said, "Oh, have you ever seen a goat sacrifice?" To me, Kevin was clearly going, "Oh no, of course not." And I was like, he's totally lying right there. It was totally a dead giveaway. So to me, Kevin was lying. I was kind of concocted and stupid and trying to trick you, and I didn't care for it that much. But he was definitely lying. So I never saw that as being part of the afterlife. The afterlife, the whole theory to me is just, I didn't even take it seriously at all. I just thought there's no way. I thought it was but that's just my immediate interpretation. And I did my review before I watched your review. So in my review, I was like, the afterlife. And then I watched yours and you were like, the afterlife is my favorite theory. I was like, oh, okay. I didn't mean to insult your favorite theory in my review. I just simply hadn't watched your review yet. That was just my natural immediate reaction, that I just didn't think I didn't take that theory seriously at all. And now Lindelof saying that he pretty much said that it's off the table. I mean, he didn't say it outright, but he seemed to be strongly indicating that it was meant to be either Nora was lying or not. And and you can kind of, although I will say overall Lindelof has vastly improved over his Lost finale, you can still say that he screws up in some areas where there's interpretation where he didn't mean there to be interpretation, where he says, no, that's not interpretation. But he leaves it over for people like you and other people to interpret it that way because he didn't maybe do a good enough job of covering up.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think when I hear Lindelof say well, and to be clear, I'll be clear, the one quote that has me sort of throughout the article, he was only talking about the two possibilities, nor lying nor not. But the one quote is when he says that when Nora calls Lori, that was meant to be key to the audience, that this was a real life, not an afterlife. And so I might as well go ahead and talk about the two things that bother me when you take the afterlife off the table. And also, I want to clarify that I wasn't too attached to the idea of the afterlife. I just kind of preferred it to the others. But if you rule it out, I'm actually fine with that. It doesn't bother me. It's more of the fact that it's not as interpretive as I was thinking it was to begin with, because I like the idea of having three, a thing that could be open to multiple interpretations, where this, after the article, it sounds like he's more grounding it where it's not as open as I thought it was. But anyway, what he said about the call for Lori is that was meant to be the cue to the audience that this was the real world, that this wasn't an afterlife or a parallel universe or whatever. And he also talked about how Kevin's behavior, which is those are the two things that I have issues with after the afterlife is rolled off, is the fact that Lori is still alive and Kevin's behavior. Because not that I mind that Lori's still alive. I know some people really pulling for her to still be alive, but to me it's more interesting if it's left open to interpretation, because I didn't expect to see her. I expected the show to end with us wondering whether or not Lori actually died. And when I thought about this, maybe this could be an afterlife, I thought maybe that's still left it that way, that it's up to interpretation, that maybe Lori's alive and maybe she isn't. But the article makes it clear that she is alive, and Lindelof talks about it being a writing decision because they wanted this character in the finale for Nora to sort of confine in, and they said they had the idea of it being either Erica or Lori, and Lindelof was saying that scene was meant to cue in the audience that it's it's not an afterlife or a parallel universe or a bizarre world or whatever. And if that's the case, I think they chose poorly. I think they should have chose Erica. I think Erica makes a lot more sense because we've seen earlier in the season, Erica and Nora were actually really close with one another, and it doesn't seem like she actually knew Lori all that well. And and plus, if you want to make it clear that this isn't an afterlife, don't show someone that could possibly be dead. To me, that's just that's the wrong move. If you wanted to make it clear as reality, then you should have had Erica in there.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to what I was just saying. Is excuse me. Even though I will say that, Lindelof has far exceeded what he did with Lost. He's definitely, I would almost say he's vindicated himself for the Lost disaster. But you could still see these mistakes that he made, like he made in Lost, where he intended one thing and it came across to 99% of the people a completely different way than he intended it. And that's a prime example. I agree with you totally. If he wanted to make it clear that this is the real world, then he shouldn't have shown a character that could potentially be dead. So, but that said, I did read it as, oh, Laurie's alive. I didn't think that, oh, this is an afterlife. But I also thought that the scene when she was on the boat, I saw that as a little more up for interpretation than a lot of other people did. I think a lot of other people said, oh, she's dead. Oh, she just killed herself. Whereas I was leaning in that direction. I was like, oh, she probably killed herself. I was like, I don't know. When Jill and Tommy called her, I mean, you could view that as that changed her mind and she didn't kill herself. So I saw a possible interpretation of where she might not have killed herself, even though I was leaning in the direction that she did. Whereas a lot of people were just like, oh, 100%, she just killed herself. So, so with that being the case, I mean, so that's kind of probably why I more read it as, well, this proves Laurie is alive. Whereas other people were like, well, this could be an afterlife because they were so certain that she had killed herself. So I think that might be where Damon Lindelof failed there. He underestimated how certain some people were that she killed herself. So that makes it, that could be an afterlife for all anyone knows. And I don't think he really thought about that.
Yeah, and just to reassert, when I was first watching this episode, I saw Laurie alive. I took that as her being alive. It wasn't until later where I heard this other theory that I started to pique my interest. Like, oh, maybe you got a point there. But now I'm back to, well, she's definitely alive. And to me, that's less interesting to me. That's why sort of my opinion of the finale has gone down a bit. Not saying that it's bad by any means whatsoever, but still a great finale. But it's the fact that it's less open to interpretation. Of course, the other thing that I was talking about was saying that I felt less of after that possibility was ruled out was Kevin's weird behavior. And especially reading this article where Lindelof was talking about it, because he was saying that was done as a sort of romantic comedy trope. And where, a character is behaving one way where he doesn't know this is the truth. And he did bring up, Akton, you brought up earlier a couple of tells that he was in fact lying. But I don't know, they're definitely good points by far, but I think the way I was looking at it before, where there's all these different interpretations, there were sort of kinks and holes in all three things, and I just took that as two of the holes in the death possibility. Whereas if you just look at it binary, where she's lying or she's not, it's still, you can look at it where there's some holes in each possibility that Nora did go to this bizarre world or departure world and thing that didn't. So I just thought that was just the third option. But again, and I was in my review, I feel kind of, I thought about taking the review down or adjusting it or making a comment on it, but I'm not. I decided to just leave it as is because I started talking about Lost and how so many people misinterpret that, and then I went on to show a misinterpretation in the leftover finale. But the thing is, I was never bothered by the people who misinterpreted Lost as they all died. I was bothered by, or they were dead the whole entire time since the plane crashed. I wasn't bothered by that interpretation that people misread that, because I could actually understand people misreading that. I was bothered by the people who refused to go off that, even when Damon Lindelof and the showrunners outright said that is not a possibility. So I'm definitely not going to be like that. But
well, Mark, to be fair, your misinterpretation was not directly contradicted by a very clear line of dialogue in the show. Like your interpretation was valid. I mean, I didn't buy it personally, but your interpretation was not directly contradicted, whereas the whole idea in Lost that they were dead the whole time was very clearly explained that was not the case by a very clear line of dialogue that you can't miss by Jack's dad, Kristen Shepherd, there at the end. I mean, so those were just, I'm sorry, but if you think they were dead the whole time, you're idiots, because you didn't hear the fucking line that tells you they're not dead the whole time. Whereas in The Leftovers, there is the equivalent line does not exist. So your interpretation or your misinterpretation is valid. I mean, there was nothing in the show. The only way we know it's not the case is because Damon Lindelof said it wasn't. I mean, that's pretty much but there's nothing in the show that directly contradicts your interpretation. So I think there's actually a pretty huge difference between your misinterpretation and the misinterpretation of people who say that they were dead the whole time and lost because they weren't listening to the fucking show where they told you they weren't dead the whole time. So I think there's a difference there.
That is definitely a very good point, and there is a difference because the people who still to this day, even after they see Lindelof and all these other people explain to Lost Ending, they still think, oh no, they were dead the whole time. Like they're just outright wrong. Whereas with the leftovers, like even after reading this article with Damon Lindelof, even the people still like, well, I still want to interpret it as an afterlife. I actually wouldn't hold that against them as much. Like I personally wouldn't do that because I'll take Lindelof at his word. But if another viewer is like, I actually think it's better as an afterlife, I actually wouldn't hold that against them personally.
Yeah, I mean, sure, I wouldn't either. I mean, I didn't see it that way personally, but if that's the way, I mean, as long as you're saying that's kind of what makes the most sense to me, that's what I like the best, and not saying that's definitely how it was.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're saying that, then no. But if you're still saying, I still kind of like that interpretation the best, that's that's personal preference.
And again, I gotta say, like from the very beginning in my review, I was always open to all possibilities. I had never ruled out anything. I never said this is definitely the case on any of them. So but when we get down to it, when we look at the lying, is Nora lying question, which is the question. It seemed like, I don't know, I'll get your opinion on this, Afghan, because from your review, it seemed like you would be happy either way. Whereas me personally, like I'm not going to rule out either possibility. Of course, it's meant to be open to interpretation. And my personal interpretation, or the way I feel more comfortable with, is saying that she was lying. Like I'm much happier because when I first watched the show, and I did take it at face value, I didn't even consider that she was lying till later. I didn't like it to me because I never really wanted a definitive answer on what happened to the people who departed. But actually, that's why I think what makes the ending so brilliant is that some people did want that definitive answer. So the people who did want it, they have it. And the people like me who didn't want it, well, we can just say that she's lying and dismiss it as just a lie. And I don't know, just overall, I think it's just more interesting to me that the radiation people, or Dr. Eden, Dr. Becker, or whatever, that I don't know. I think they're frauds, or at least they might have believed they were doing what they were doing was correct. But I just think the whole thing was just vaporizing people, which is part of the reason why I like the afterlife theory, because that went along with, they just killed these people who went in. But taking the afterlife theory off the table doesn't mean that's still a possibility. It still could be that they were just vaporizing people and Nora just got out of there in time. And of course, you offered a further explanation for that in your review, but I don't know if you want to talk about your feelings on, whether Nora was lying or not.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I have heard some very strong opinions on both sides. I have heard people very more so on the lying side, like absolutely 100% convinced she's definitely lying, and we know this because of this and that and this and this. And we know this because of that. And I find the whole thing fascinating. I'm actually about 50-50. I think it could go pretty much either way very easily. And I think that I cannot really come up with a strong argument against either one other than to say that I don't think, if you're saying you're 100% right, you're not. Because I think it can go either way. But if I were to lean one way or the other slightly, if I were to put it the 50-50 up to 51-49, believe it or not, it would be that she's telling the truth. And I'll tell you why. And that is because Nora is at peace. The whole series is about her, and she even mentions this in this episode, shooting the hookers and all the different things all the crazy things that she does, getting hugs from Holy Wayne and all that stuff, that she's clearly is beyond all of that now. So if she didn't really see her children at peace, and come to to see her children living their own lives and being happy. If she didn't really see that, then you have to explain how she is now at peace. Now, there are still hundreds of possible explanations of that if she's lying. She could be crazy. She could have convinced herself. And the theory that I just threw out there, and this is not a theory that I'm 100% bought and sold on, it's just kind of something I just threw out there as one of many, many possibilities, is that the scientists, like, they were like, okay, this is all a scam. We're not really sending people anywhere, but take your $20,000 and hide, or whatever. What was it, $200,000, whatever, and just get out of here. And if anyone asks, this is the story, and they invent the story of this other world, and that's something that they came up with. And maybe over this 20, 30-year period, however long it's been, Nora is starting to really, really sit on the story and really, really convincing herself of it, and like liking the story, and like, yeah, maybe my children really are living their own lives, and they're happy now. And she's kind of convinced herself of this. So that's one explanation of it. But however, if you are going to be, gung-ho, if you're going to say she's lying, then I need to hear from you an explanation, not just you specifically, but anybody in general, an explanation of why is she at peace now? Because she very clearly is at peace. So if she didn't actually see her children, then how did she get that way? And so I just need to hear that as part of the explanation of why she's lying for me to believe it. Because she clearly is at peace now. So there needs to be some reason for that. And there are many, as I said, many possible explanations. She could easily be lying or crazy or whatever and still be at peace. But I just need to hear that as part of the explanation. So that's why I'm slightly, maybe tiny bit leaning to her telling the truth, just because she clearly is at peace now.
Yeah. It's like Cardinal Doomsday in the chat says nothing should be set in stone. It should all be up to the individual viewer. And that's right. That is absolutely right. And I agree with you, Apkin, that I'm not saying, and definitely, like, I haven't heard these people saying, oh, she's definitely lying, because nothing's definite. Like, everything is open to interpretation. And in fact, when I say, like, I personally, like, interpret it as her lying, it has less to do with, I think that's what they were saying, and more to do with, I'm more comfortable with that explanation. I'm more happy with that ending. And I would give up a possible explanation. And anyway, this is the way I read it. And of course, this maybe isn't the case because it's all open to interpretation. But I read it as that story she tells about her finding her family and they don't need her anymore. And I think I might have mentioned this in my review, is that's a conclusion she came to by herself, that she realized on her own that her family were probably, I think there have been some hints of this throughout the season, and that her family was together, so she invented this story that they were better off without her, and that's how she came at peace. So that story was just an invention of that, just to get the point that she was sure that her family sort of moved on without her, even if they were dead or wherever the hell they went. But that's just the way I thought of it. Of course, it could be interpreted in any number of ways. This really in the chat, Walter Sabak, if I read that correctly, says Nora almost gets zapped in the radiation machine, experience subconscious dream state that Kevin visits in his own mind, experiences her story about her family. Yeah. Another explanation. There's many ways it could be interpreted.
Yeah, she could really believe that it happened, but it actually didn't. I mean, yeah, that's another possibility. Although you would think she would notice that the time, because she made it sound like she was there for a very long time. Was she
5
unconscious
years or something?
Yeah. Was she having this dream for that long of a time? That would be my only pause there. Like, how would she not notice the time difference if she was rolling her head? But it's possible. It's still not. I wouldn't rule it out entirely.
Yeah, and that's the same thing with the with the afterlife theory, the theory that when she this bizarre world, this left departure world was just her hotel, her afterlife, and then she came back from it. That's another flaw in that theory is the time difference. Like, was she dead for 5 years? Don't think so.
Yeah.
But yeah, I sort of lost my train of thought here. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you had any more thoughts on this, Hepkin.
Yeah, I kind of did, but I can't remember.
I sort of lost
my train of thought as well. Something.
The one thing I did want to bring up is, and I know you haven't seen Black Sails yet, so I don't want to spoil it too much for you, but I was just so shocked about how similar these finales were. They had their final episode of the show just a few months ago, and it's only similar in the regard that somebody tells the story, and you're open. You're open to believe whether or not the story is lying or not. Now, in Black Sails, they actually did show scenes from the story the guy was telling, but that doesn't actually mean that it for definitely happened, because you're still getting it through his telling of the story, so he could totally be lying still. And in both cases, the majority of people took this story, like Leftovers and Black Sails, majority of audience took this story at face value until they actually went back at it, and then there was the possibility that the story was a lie. And in both cases, there collaborating scenes planted earlier in the episode that support the lying thing, but not definitively. It still could be explained away that the person is telling the truth. And with Black Sails, I made this video exploring, I had a different sort of with Black Sails. At first I took it at face value, so I didn't like the episode, but then once I realized it was open to interpretation, I made another video, and I was very happy with it. And I got all these people arguing in the comment section for months after, definitively saying she was definitively lying or he was definitively telling the truth. And the whole time I was like, guys, it was meant to be open to interpretation. And they would always, no, it's not, you're wrong. And it's sort of, so I wonder if I'll get the same response with the Leftovers, if I'll get these people saying it's definitively lying or definitively telling the truth. When clearly that's not the case. And the scenes that they drop early that could support the lying thing is I brought up in my review about how when she's in that little ball filling with water, you hear her pull back and she's about to yell, and it seems like she's about to yell stop, but then the scene cuts, and that was purposely done to leave it. So maybe she yelled stop, maybe she didn't, maybe she yelled stop at Becker when Aiden went and did the water thing anyway. So it's still open to interpretation, but it was done purposely in that way to sort of leave it up to the viewer.
Yeah, I don't know. I just from what I've seen, it's just I've seen more people who are just definitive she's lying, absolutely convinced that she's lying. I'll throw a name out there for you. Rob Sesternino on post-show recaps. He doesn't usually actually do the Leftovers podcast, but he did a guest spot, and he was just so 100% convinced that she's definitely lying, and this is why, and this is why. I also had a couple commenters on my video. One commenter in particular was long paragraphs about this is how we know Nora's lying, and this is how. And I can't say that I can't tell either of them that you're wrong. That's wrong. But they have valid interpretations. But where they're wrong is saying this 100%, because they're not looking at the other side of things. For every argument that she's lying, you could kind of come with an counter argument. Well, maybe she isn't. I mean, so it's, yeah. So, I mean, to me, I'm just 50-50, but it's fascinating to hear the people who are just so certain one way or the other.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't catch that post-show recast. I didn't know Rob Sesternino was saying that. That's very interesting. But yeah, I do think, even though I will never claim that definitively she was lying. My definitive stance is it's open to interpretation, and neither interpretation is incorrect. But me personally, that's the one I prefer personally, and that has to do with my personal sensibilities. And
although when asked, Damon Lindelof did say that there is an answer in his mind. Like
in
he
his
knows
mind,
what
yeah, but you have to keep in mind that he's not the only writer in the show. That it's all done with a bunch of other people. And I got the impression from his interview that the other writers may or may not have had different interpretations.
Well, what's fascinating to me is also in that interview that he said that in the beginning when they first started it, he said, "I need to know what the answer is, even if I don't plan on telling people the answer. I need to know what it is." And he asked the author of the original book, who's the co-producer, Tom Peralta, what the answer was. He was like, "Yeah, actually, honestly, I've never even really thought about it much." and Damon Lindelof was like, "No, there needs to be an answer, and even if I never reveal it, I want to know what the answer is, or at least he has an answer in his mind as he's filming it." And did you also read the part where they said that they were talking about filming a scene from the beginning scene of the first episode of the series from the kid's perspective, where the little baby's perspective, where everybody else disappears?
Oh, right. Yeah, I think I remember reading that. That was interesting.
I mean, they decided not to do that, obviously, but they wouldn't have actually aired it. It would just be something like that they would have, like, oh, this is what the answer is. So that almost kind of makes me think that maybe they do mean that to be the answer, that there is a 98% world. But this answer that Damon Lindelof said he needed to have, it makes me think that might be what he thinks the answer is.
From my impression from the article, and again, this is my interpretation. Now we're interpreting the interview rather than the episode. But my interpretation of what I got out of it is that Lindelof leaned toward there actually being a departure world, and Tom Perrotta leaned the other way with that. He wants it more open to interpretation, I think.
Yeah.
But I did find that really interesting about this article, that because you always think of Lindelof and he always gets criticized, not just for Lost, but his work on like Prometheus and other stuff and The Leftovers. He always gets criticized as the mystery guy, the ambiguous guy who never answers anything. He just likes to fuck with you. But this article actually made him out to be more of the wanting to give definitive answers. Like he said from the start that he wanted to give a definitive answer, and it was Tom Perrotta who was actually the guy who wanted to be more ambiguous. And that I found very interesting. But
yeah, that is true. Tom Peralta, he even said, like, yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I'd never really thought about it.
And also, what they said in the article was that Lindelof. I'll put a link in the description once this video is done to the article, so you guys can check it out too. But what he also said is that originally in the writers' room, they were talking about making that definitive, showing the departure world and that being the definitive answer. But it was Tom Perrotta who thought, well, maybe we should just have Nora telling the story and to leave it up to mine. So that's interesting. So originally their intention was it to be the definitive answer, but it does seem like what they landed on was open to interpretation.
Which is better. And that's better, considering that they have said all along that they're not going to give the answer. It would have been really weird if they definitively gave the answer. Absolutely. I mean, even though that's not 100% answer, because you still don't know like how or why. I mean, it's still random that people would just suddenly go to a parallel universe. I mean, that doesn't really explain why did that happen, but it does give you quite a bit of the answer, 75% of the answer.
And Colonel Doomsday says the author of the book is ambiguous about the ending of the show. I like it. Yeah, and I think it was his sort of. I never read the book, but it sounds like he's always meant to sort of leave it open like that. And one thing I do want to sort of transition to talk about the finale before we move on is that in your review, Afghan, you talked about how the ending was very much happier. And actually, not just you. I've heard a lot of people say that the ending was much happier than they thought. But I don't know, like. I still, to me, I think is almost on par with the season 1 and season 2. Season 1 and season 2 finales, where it had this sort of both those endings also were sort of upbeat and happy, but had elements of sort of I don't know, sadness or whatever, or elements of it. And I think with this season 3, I mean the series finale, it had elements of, yeah, it's a happy ending because Kevin and Nora are reunited, but they were apart for 20 years, and they sort of, life moved on without them, but they sort of had this, thing, and ultimately it all ended out well. But if you believe the interpretation, Nora's lying. I mean, sure, she's lying in order to bring them together and to make Kevin feel better, but also it adds another layer of, well, she's still being deceptive towards him, and I like that. I think it really works as an ending.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry, what were you just saying?
About the ending being happy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. To me, like, both of their stories were kind of resolved. They both got past their shit. Like, Nora got past her. She finally got past her shit about her kids being gone, and Kevin pointed out to her at the hotel, like, when are you ever going to be okay? And it seemed like, really, and now watching that episode, Nora never was going to get past that. It's like that was just going to be a thing
Yeah.
for her forever, and she did. And then Kevin, of course, in the previous episode, which we'll talk about soon, he got past his issues. So they were both past their issues, and now they are back together again. And yeah, sir, she might have thrown out a little lie about the parallel universe, but she also may have believed it. I mean, it might not have been a lie. It might have been something that didn't happen, and yet she believed it. So, I mean, there's multiple interpretations there. So, yeah, I don't know. Even though it took 20 years, I mean, it did happen. And I did not expect that much of a resolution where both of them were going to get past their shit. They're going to be happy. I mean, to me, like, this really is a conclusion. Whereas it was a season 1 and season 2, obviously there was still shit that could happen after. Like, they weren't totally, I mean, sure, season 2, they all ended up, oh, look, my whole family's here. But as you see in season 3, like, that didn't solve anything. Where, I mean, they still all had their shit. Nora still had her shit with her kids, and Kevin still had his shit. They still had it, even after that, what seemed to be a kind of a happy ending at the end of season 2. Whereas at the end of season 3, there's nothing left. I mean, you couldn't do a season 4 now. I mean, they're okay now. As we had talked about in our mid-season review, like, people like Tommy and Jill just don't get, and Erica don't get to be on the show because they're okay now. And that's why I think there is no more show, because Kevin and Nora are finally okay. And I did not actually expect that. I did not expect them to be okay totally in the end. And so to me, this is way happier than I thought it would be.
Oh, really? I was kind of expecting them to be. And it is, because it is I agree with you. It is more of a conclusion than the season 1 or season 2 endings. And actually, I was kind of expecting that, or hoping for it anyway, because I knew this would be the final episode, so I didn't want them, the character stories, like mysteries you can leave open all you like, but I wanted the character stories to be wrapped up, because that's what the show is ultimately about. And I think they did an amazing job at it, a good job at it. And I'd say, like, the season 2 finale sort of wrapped up, like, some characters, like you said, like Tommy and Jill and Erica. It was just other characters, the ones who were the focus of season 3, were still the ones who were still in turmoil. And then season 3 ends with the conclusion to their storyline. So I like it. I think I wasn't too surprised that was this happy. And I'd still say it was about just as happy as the 1 and 2 ending, but it was just more finite. It was more of a conclusion.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I would disagree there with equally as happy, because season 1 and 2, they still had shit. I mean, there still was stuff to be resolved, whereas this is a resolution. So, yeah, to me, it was way happier. But that's just the way I saw it.
Yeah, Colonel Doomsday said resolution surprised the hell out of me, so he was surprised too. I don't know if I didn't really think about it either way, to be honest. I think I was more of hoping for a resolution, so I was satisfied with it.
Yeah,
that way. Cool. So we sort of alluded to. Let's sort of now backtrack a bit and get into the previous episode 7. This is another thing I've heard. I think someone in the chat was talking about this earlier, and there was another thing mentioned in the article. Damon Lindelof said there were two things, only two things about this show that he would never answer definitively. The first one is whether or not Nora is lying. He'll never definitively answer that. And the other question is whether or not when Kevin died, he actually went to the afterlife, or if it was just all in his head. And so he says they will never answer those two things. So it seems like that's the other thing that's meant to be left open to interpretation, to whether or not Kevin actually died, or if he was just all in his head and stuff. And they were actually in the article, it was talking a bit about the revelation in the finale that Kevin has had a heart condition. They're saying that could possibly have something to do with why he was experiencing these weird things in the afterlife, that those were just side effects from his condition, which I don't necessarily buy. I don't know. To me, I don't really buy this as much as open to interpretation, because there's too many things, particularly in season 2. Like, I think in season 3, they were trying much harder to leave it open for interpretation. But in season 2, to me, there's just too much that definitively says that he actually died. But anyway, let me get your thoughts on this after before you go further.
Well, yeah, and I'm disappointed that he's like leaving this up for interpretation, because it seems pretty cut and dry to me that he actually died, as you said, especially in season 2. Because for one thing, okay, if this is all in his head, why would he see Virgil there? He didn't know Virgil killed himself. Like, how the fuck would he know Virgil was there? Like, he saw Virgil there because Virgil had killed himself after Kevin killed himself, or got killed. So I mean, there's no possible way that he can know that Virgil did that. So to me, that's 100% right there that he's in the afterlife. And then the David Burton thing, and then he met David Burton, which, by the way, who we never got confirmed in season 2 was David Burton. He was the mysterious Australian guy. And that's from Kevin's perspective. There's just some mysterious dude on the bridge and the mysterious dude in the karaoke bar. Who knows who he is? He wouldn't even if he had heard this newscast about David Burton, which we don't know that he did, because we never saw that on screen. The only time the newscast of David Burton came up was in a Tommy and Lori scene. So how would Kevin know about this guy? So to me, and I agree for sure, like season 2 especially was definitely very definitive that this is the afterlife. Season 3, they tried to be like, oh, let's try to make it more ambiguous. Pull back a little bit. But there's still a lot. To me, it's still pretty cut and dry. Like, there's still things that he shouldn't be able to know if this is all in his head. Like, how did he know what Christopher Sunday looked like? I mean, and I just can't. I just have a hard time with all the explanations being off screen. Oh, off screen sometimes. So to me, if too many things happen off screen, then it's a shitty theory, because you can't rely too much on what happened off screen. How did he know what Christopher Sunday looked like? How did he know what Christopher Sunday said to his dad? Also, another thing which I didn't mention in my video is how David Burton in season 3 says that he's God. Kevin had no contact with Matt whatsoever. There was no possible way to know that David Burton was calling himself God. So Kevin would have no knowledge of this whatsoever. And yet, in the afterlife, David Burton calls himself God just as he did in real life. And there's zero chance, even off screen, that Kevin ever heard anything about David Burton being God. So to me, I mean, it's so 100% that he's in the afterlife to me. But then Damon Lindelof was like, oh, hold on. Well, it's up for interpretation. So, I mean, now it's up for interpretation. So you could look at it either way. I am, just as Rob Sesternino is going off 100% that Laura is really lying, I am still 100% that he's the afterlife, because there's just too many things that Kevin could not possibly know. There's zero chance. Or too many things you can say, oh, it had to happen off screen. Like, there's too much that you can't rely too much on off screen. So to me, I feel like it's it's cut and dry that he's in the afterlife. So it's kind of pisses me off, honestly, that he's putting this for interpretation, because I don't, I just think it's pretty clear. But it's, now that he said it, then you can interpret it either way. If you want to say it's in his head, then that's a valid interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me, it's flimsy excuse after flimsy excuse. And there's also the thing about which the interviewer actually confronted Lindelof about is the fact that Kevin in the International Assassin episode saw his father in the afterlife, and his father was in Perth at the hotel, which Kevin didn't have this information before he died. So how would he know that his father was actually in Perth and doing this drugs? And then, Lindelof came up with this very flimsy excuse about it having to do with sort of Aboriginal culture and how their interpretation is that they can enter their dreams. So I suppose his excuse was that Kevin's father somehow entered Kevin's hallucination or into his dream, but that doesn't mean he was dead. And God, it's just it's flimsy excuse. And the thing with David Burton, like Kevin knowing that he's calling himself God, the flimsy excuse there is that John told him, because John was on the boat, but John didn't really have much to do with David Burton, and why would John even tell Kevin about this? And it's just, and also the bigger thing to me, even above all this stuff of what Kevin does and doesn't know, is the fact that he came back. He literally came back to life. I mean, John was convinced. Like, John went from being this guy who burned down people's houses for even suggesting there was any sort of mysticism to someone who actually actively promoted this mysticism, whatever. And he did this massive change happen in John because he saw Kevin come back to life when he should have died when he got shot. And some people bring up the heart condition, but to me, if Kevin had a heart condition, wouldn't that make it more likely that he would die if he got shot near the heart than less likely? I mean, the fact that Kevin was able to come back to life after being shot and after being buried, he digs himself out of the hole twice after 2 days. How could this possibly not be an afterlife?
Yeah, and there's flimsy excuses for that too. I had one of my commenters say, well, he was in some form of suspended animation. And I'm like, come on, you're just reaching for explanations. Suspended animation, where are you getting that from? I mean, he died.
Suspended animation
out of the ground. And John shot him. I don't know. It's really disappointing that David Lindelof is saying, "Oh, it could go either way." But how did he die? I mean, how did he die and come back to life? I don't know. I just think there's no interpretation there. He died and came back to life. He crawled out of the ground. He was shot. There's no. If you're coming up with some lame excuse, it's a lame excuse. It's really, really reaching to try to make your theory work. Is the way that I see it. But that's not the way David Lindelof is presenting it. He's saying,
the way I see it is, they decided this post season 2, and season 3 they decided to, and that's what actually I see that as kind of not horrible. It doesn't make the season really bad or anything, but it is kind of bad writing that they post mortally decide, they change their mind and be like, oh, let's make it ambiguous. Because if you just judge season 3 on season 3, there is issues Kevin knowing David Burton was God, and there are some issues, but it's not as bad as if you bring in all the evidence from season 2, which makes it clear. So I see it as a sort of writer mistake, or sort of writers not getting their shit together.
I also, from that flimsy excuse you said that John could have told him, and I will debunk that entirely. Is even if John told him, he would tell him, there was this guy in the boat named David Burton that called himself God. How would Kevin know that's the same guy he saw on the bridge? He never said he was David Burton when he was on the bridge. Kevin would have no way of knowing, even if John told him that. He would have no way to make that connection to the guy he saw in the afterlife. Zero. So that I don't even buy that at all. That's completely debunked.
Well, Apkin, you combine it with the other flimsy excuse, which makes it even more flimsy, that Kevin knew before he went to the afterlife, and the first time that he saw a newscast of David Burton, so he subconsciously subconsciously knew that the guy in the bridge was David Burton. And now you're getting into crazy. What the? That's just crazy. No. Oh my god. Off the walls crazy. So I don't know. I wouldn't be more sort of willing to sort of go after those who believe that Kevin wasn't actually dead. I'd be more inclined to go after the writers for sort of changing their minds, be like, oh, let's make this ambiguous when clearly it isn't. Like, I make comparisons to my favorite movie of all time, 12 Monkeys, because I watched on the commentary and the director was saying, oh, it's open to interpretation whether or not he's actually insane or if he is time traveling. But I think the movie makes it fucking clear that he's actually time traveling, and that's made clear by the fact that the psychologist changed her mind and was on board with him, because she wouldn't have done that unless it was actually the case. And the same thing with John here. John wouldn't have had this massive shift in character if it wasn't actually beyond a doubt that Kevin was coming back to life.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, because in 12 Monkeys, I mean, they go to the scene at the end that he remembered as a little kid. Like, they show him as a little kid remember seeing that scene, and this was a memory that he had.
Yeah.
So in 12 Monkeys. So I don't know how that is interpreted as anything but yeah, I don't know. That kind of thing pisses me off, where they definitively give you the answer and go, "Oh, it's up for interpretation." But it's not. It's not. But,
yeah, and to be clear to anyone watching, we're not saying we feel that way about the Nora lying thing. Like, we both agree that is left to interpretation.
Nora lying thing is definitely interpretation. Yeah. As I said several times, I'm 50-50. I can see it go either way. Yeah. But in this case, it's only up for interpretation because Damon Lindelof said it is, and as you said, I think they decided this in season 3. Like, I think in season 2 it was very, very clearly the afterlife. And then in season 3, it was like, hey, let's make it ambiguous. So,
I mean, there are certain things that I did. Well, I want to get more into this most powerful man in the world and his identical twin brother, because I actually like this a bit better than International Assassin, just a little bit, because I think it was highly interpreted. Like, I love this episode so much. I did like an hour-long video on it, and that took me all week to make, because I just love thinking about this episode. And this, I think, was the gem of season 3. And what I did kind of like, though, about that episode, that it could, we just said, which I totally stand behind and agree with. There's no way that this isn't an afterlife. But leaving that aside for a second, I like the fact that everything conclusion that Kevin came to in this, the stuff that, like, say, Grace's children told him, the stuff that Christopher Sunday told him, is stuff that he could come to on his own. Like, they weren't telling him anything that he didn't already know. They were just making him more aware of it. And the whole episode was about them trying to get him to realize, why are you coming? Because everyone kept asking, why are you here? Why are you here? And I love how Evie said to him, well, you're just a puppet. You're just doing what others, because it's exactly what it was. And so everyone in this afterlife wasn't really giving him any new information. They were just trying to drill into his head, trying to get him to see what is your real purpose in being here.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I said in my review as well. Like, I love that about that episode, that it was a journey for Kevin, is learning, why are you here? Why are you really? And people just kept bringing that up over and over again. Now, getting back to the idea that it's all in Kevin's head, that is the one I could see from that perspective. Well, this is why it's all in Kevin's head, because it's all about Kevin, and it's all about Kevin's journey, and people keep leading him on this journey. So that shows you that it's in Kevin's head. Of course, I had an explanation for that, which is that, and I think I'm kind of deriving this from Lost a little bit, and I think it's fair because they're both made by Damon Lindelof, where it was implied, I think Kristen Shepard had a line that he said to Jack, you guys created this afterlife. So that was something that they created together. Whereas in this case, I think this is something that Kevin created and everybody else is going along with. And now people might say, well, what, they all die and they're just in Kevin's afterlife? No, I think that there are different incarnations of the afterlife. I think that is just one of them.
Absolutely.
that they are in a Kevin. So when that is nuked, it's not like Eve and Meg and Evie and all of them are gone. They're just and Patty. They're in the next afterlife, whatever that is. Like they're in a different form of the afterlife. They're still dead. They're still spirits. They're still out there. It was just that they had all come into that particular form of the afterlife, which was created by Kevin, which is why David Burton called him the most powerful man in the world, because he's the most powerful man in that particular afterlife. And they were all there for him. To me, that doesn't prove it's in Kevin's head. It just shows that this was the world that Kevin created. And I do that is kind of what I got from Lost, that they said that that's the world that Jack and all the rest of them had created, that world together. This is the world that Kevin had created. And then when it's gone, when it's nuked, Evie and Meg are still, they're in some other afterlife. David Burton is still in some other afterlife. It's not like they're just gone. It's the way that I see it. So, but they all were definitely pointing Kevin into though they weren't consciously doing it. I do believe Evie was very much caught up in that world. Like she believed what she was saying, but subconsciously she was trying to guide Kevin and to tell him, you're a puppet. You're doing what Kevin Sr. and Grace and all those other people want you to do. Why are you here? And that's what I just love that. That's one of the reasons I just love that episode.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think, and this is the thing about the most powerful man in the world, why I love it, why I think it was the best episode of the season, one of the best episodes I've seen, maybe the best episode of the entire show, in my opinion, my favorite, I'll say, is because it is so open to interpretation. That's why, like I said with the finale, I sort of thought less of it when I realized it wasn't as open to interpretation. But this one totally is. Like you know, even if you want to, you could say that Kevin didn't really die, even though me and Akton will argue that you're wrong. But still, I mean, you could think that. But even if we do agree with us, there's still tons of different ways to interpret this. There's tons of different ways to interpret what this afterlife means. Like I'm still open to the possibility. Like I think that Kevin is dead and this is an afterlife, but I'm still open to the possibility that maybe these other people who appear in his afterlife aren't actually the spirits. They're sort of more of apparitions of his mind. So it's not really the spirit of Patty, but it is sort of an afterlife in that terms. Or maybe it is Patty. Maybe she is coming in. But I think either way, that I agree with what you said, Apkin, that this isn't the only afterlife. This was just Kevin's little creation. This was his little world. And when it was destroyed, it doesn't mean like everyone else in the afterlife were gone for good. It just means that Kevin couldn't return to that sort of afterlife. And that afterlife is the one that allowed him to come back to life. So it's sort of definitively saying to Kevin that once you're dead, you're dead. That's it. There's no more of this purgatory stuff where you go through these journeys, which is what it was all about. And I just think the whole thing was just done so well. Like I love how when Patty was saying, what she was doing in her role of Secretary of Defense, whatever, she was saying, you're the one you brought me here. You brought me out of retirement. And to me, I took that as a metaphor of her saying that Kevin consciously brought her back for this other afterlife experience because he needed her help.
And what do you think about the theory that, because I'm like almost 100% convinced of this, maybe 99%, but the theory that Patty wasn't the Secretary of Defense until he said she was. So when the other Kevin cop dude said, "Who's the Secretary of Defense?" and he says, "Patty Levin," he manifested her as the Secretary of Defense, which she says later, somebody asked you and you named me Secretary of Defense. That she was referring directly to that scene. And you could throw that into the Kevin is all in Kevin's head thing, but as far as this being Kevin's afterlife and he's in control of it, he's the most powerful man in the world, that he brought her back. Like she wasn't necessarily going to be involved in this. He needed her, but that still really was her. And then I believe she was really genuinely trying to help her, and like as she said very sincerely, that she was paying him back for that. He helped her when he drowned her in the well and let her go. Like that when he let her go, he did her a good service. And maybe she went into, wherever the people from Lost went in the church at the end, up in heaven or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe she went there, but then she came back to help him because he helped her. And that's because when she named him, he summoned her back. And now that's the way I see it. That, I think, is definitely up for interpretation. You don't have to go with that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's many ways to look at it. That's just the way I personally choose to see it, that he brought her back and that she was generally there to help him, and that she did.
Yeah, Cardinal Doomsday in the chat says he does say Patty Levin like it's a question. Kind of, sort of. I think, I agree that could be interpreted as either way. Maybe she was always the Secretary of Defense, or maybe by him saying that. I actually did bring this up in my review, and I do like that. I do like that possibility. I do like that thought out there. I wouldn't say I'm 100 on it, but I like it, and I'm totally willing to go with it, that by saying Patty Levin that he summoned her. And again, this does go along with the line where she says later on that you called me out of retirement, or you chose me. And so that sort of goes along with that. So I do like that. I was surprised that it was Patty. I was expecting it to be Meg, and Meg to be a more sort of prominent role than Patty, because I thought we were kind of done with Patty. But as like you brought up in your review, I think it totally makes sense that Meg plays the one who doesn't want the world to end, because she's the antagonist. She's the adversary. She's always been an antagonist in Kevin's life, and what Kevin needs to do is to destroy the world. So it makes sense that Meg plays the role of the antagonist who's trying to stop him from doing it.
I gotta say though, even though I didn't think they would bring Patty back, we knew she was coming back because she was in the damn credits.
I didn't notice that, to be honest.
Oh, you didn't? Yeah,
No.
I noticed that. I had Liv Tyler and Ian Dowd, and Liv Tyler I was expecting, but Ian Dowd was like, oh, well, I guess Patty's gonna be in this episode because there's a damn name in the credits. So, with that being the case, as soon as he was talking on the phone to his chief of staff or whatever, and he said, oh, the Secretary of Defense is not going to be happy. I was like, it's Patty, obviously.
Oh, really? Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, well, if you didn't see Ian Dowd's name in the credits, maybe you wouldn't make that connection. But
I didn't pay that much attention to the credits.
Yeah, because I saw her name in the credits, as soon as he said Secretary of Defense, I was like, yeah, of course that's Patty.
All right. Yeah, when he was talking to the chief of staff on the phone, I was trying to, who's that voice? Who's that person? But I think it's just some random guy. It's not.
Which is weird. You would think it would be somebody, because everybody is somebody. But this was just some random whoever, which is kind of strange.
I was disappointed we didn't get more of Dean, and that he just appeared in that one scene at the start of the episode. I thought that was perfect for him, though. And I was disappointed we didn't get more on David Burton. I was hoping, what I really wanted is, and I wanted there to be a revelation in the real life, like in the Mad episode, that David Burton talked with Kevin in the afterlife, but they're not going to do that because they don't want to definitively say that's the case, which annoys me. I think they should just definitively say it, because I find that, the whole David Burton thing is interesting. Is he actually coming back to life like Kevin is?
Yeah, I mean, I think he is. Now I've heard it said that when he was in season 2, he was still alive at that time because he had already come out of the cave. But you don't know that David Burton is just. I mean, not to say this stuff happened off screen, but David Burton's whole thing is off screen because we see very little of him. So we don't really know how many times he died and came back. I mean, there was the cave was on the newscast, but doesn't mean he didn't die and come back again. So we don't know. But
yeah, and I would even throw out the possibility that he doesn't necessarily have to be dead at the exact time Kevin's in the afterlife. That maybe because he's able to do the same thing as Kevin, that he's able to leave an imprint of himself that is more knowledgeable than the other characters in this afterlife thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a possibility as well.
And I think the fact that in this afterlife thing, I liked how David Burton when he said the thing about God saying that to Meg. He's like, that was just a pickup line. To me, that was a bigger indication that the whole thing of him saying that he's God was just a lie, and he was just saying that to build himself up as better, that he never actually believed it.
Well, yeah, which is how I interpreted it anyway. So it's just kind of confirmation for that. But again, there's no way Kevin could have known that he called himself God in real life. There's no way. To me, that is just proof that it's the afterlife. But anyway, I'm sorry to get off that again. But
we're starting to go on a bit long. So I wanna get into some other stuff before we have to go. And the one thing I really want to talk about, and this is still with this episode, is Kevin Sr. and the fact that basically, like, we learned that all of his sort of things about saving the world and the whole plot about the world ending, you saw it in the promos and we see throughout the season, the world's coming to an end, and it turns out to be bullshit. And a lot of people, not a lot of people, I would say some people thought this was a cop-out. Like, oh, we're led to believe that the world is in danger and coming to an end, but it turns out not to be the case. But I think it's brilliant. I loved it. I loved how that was the case. In fact, in the same interview with Damon Lindelof, he said that the idea of season 3 was showing people who believe the world's coming to an end, and then it not coming to an end, and then having to deal with this. And of course, this only happens in the finale because that's the episode after, they thought the world was coming to an end. And that is another sort of disappointment I had in the finale, that I wanted to see what happened to Kevin Sr., to see his immediate reaction after the most powerful man in the world. But maybe that's a result of only having 8 episodes in the season. If we had more episodes, maybe would have been able to get that direct reaction.
And then Damon Lindelof told you what happened to him in the interview. Did you see that?
He
explained what happened to him. He's like, oh yeah, well, so Grace went to prison for a little bit, but Kevin Sr., they just deported him. Like, oh, he's a crazy American, and
oh right, I must have missed that part. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like Grace wasn't in prison for long because they figured, well, she was a little crazy or whatever, so she got out of, everybody lived happily ever after. Grace was in prison for a bit. She came out. Kevin Sr. just got deported. So he may have just made that up on the spot during the interview. So who knows if that's really canon? But that's just what he said. That's what he said. That was his explanation for it.
Yeah, it makes sense. But I would more have wanted to see, like, Kevin Sr. sort of, not what happened to him in terms of, like, events, but more of his mindset and how because it seemed like at the end of the episode that he come to terms with the fact that he was wrong, and he was starting to change his whole life view, which he didn't have to. Like, a lot of crazy people would just find some other way to say, no, the world's still going to end. And I want to get back to this very opening scene of the entire season, which to me, this is even more on the nose than the one they had in season 2 with the cave woman. That's still, like, way open to interpretation. And I've heard way many, whereas this one I think is a lot more clear, a lot more definitive, like that is directly about people who think the world is going to end and how they deal with the world not ending. And that one guy, the main dude, he kept thinking that the world was going to end, even though every time that it didn't happen, he's like, oh no, it's actually going to happen here. And so they could have easily made Kevin Sr. be like that, but it seems like they weren't. It seems like they were pushing him to be like him, realizing that it is actually all bullshit.
Yeah, I think so too. And as far as that being a cop-out, I mean, I don't know. If you're really watching the first couple seasons of The Leftovers, did you really think it was going to be about the world coming to an end? That just didn't sit right with me. So I never really bought that that's really what it was about. Like, that just seems too definitive. Like, this is an action adventure story now that we're going to stop the world from ending. That just seems very un-Leftovers like to even go there. So to me, I didn't really ever think the world was going to end because it just didn't seem to fit with how The Leftovers is. It seems way more in the spirit of The Leftovers to do exactly what they did, which is to have these characters who think the world is going to end, but it's not. And as you said, it was very much spelled out in the opening scene of season 3. So, I mean, I think it was brilliant. Like, I don't. see why you should have a problem with it. I think it was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, for the season, I was open to the possibility that maybe this ending world thing was real, especially when you get into the mysticism with Kevin going to the afterlife. But when they revealed that it wasn't, like, I wasn't surprised, and I really liked it, and I thought it worked very well. In fact, the more you learn, like, that Kevin Sr. still believed he needed to sing a song to stop the floods. I mean, how does that even work? I mean, how does that scientifically make sense for floods to happen around the world at the same time? I don't know. It all seemed very highly, and plus him singing a song, it seemed ridiculous. And I love the scene in Christopher Sunday. It's just like, do you really think your father can save the world by singing a song? And he's like, no. And I think Kevin, that's the first time Kevin actually thought about it. It's the first time he actually consciously realized, well, my dad's just fucking crazy. And in the previous episode, with the Laurie episode, it was interesting because you heard John talking to Laurie about, well, I had to believe Kevin Sr. because if he's wrong, then I'm wrong, and I can't be wrong because I need my closure with Evie. And so that basically describes everyone sort of who is in that group. John, Grace, Kevin, they all had their own sort of self-purposes, and they were letting that blind them to the plain truth that this is all the world wasn't actually going to come to an end. And Michael actually was the only one there who didn't really have this ulterior motive, which is why he was the one who reached out to Laurie to try to stop it, and why he was the one who wasn't really on board, because he was starting to realize that this whole thing was fake, and he wasn't blinded by his own motivations like the others were.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
Yeah, cool. Right. So I don't know if we wanted to talk very briefly about the Laurie and the Matt episode. Like, I talked a bit about the Laurie episode, a bit about how I thought that was perfect, like leaving it open to whether or not she died or not. The fact that they answered it kind of annoys me, to be honest. And Lindelof did say in this interview that when they were filming, he said when they were filming that scene, they were 95% sure that Laurie was committing suicide. But then later, after they watched it and when they were writing for the finale or whatever, they were like, oh, let's actually have Laurie be alive. And see, that to me, that seems like sort of sloppy writing on the writer.
Well, what they said was the actress's performance is what convinced them.
Yeah,
she was playing it as if she was going to
live. Which I don't necessarily agree with, but that's the way they saw it.
But I don't know. I honestly did not have a problem with this because I thought it was up for interpretation from the beginning. And I did think most likely she was dead, but I didn't think it was 100%. I think it could be easily interpreted as she got that phone call. She's like, you know what, I'm going to live. And, I mean, they didn't show you. She went in there. You don't know. Did she turn the knob the wrong way? Did she not? You don't really know. So I'm really, honestly, I was okay with it. I was okay with getting an answer on it. I kind of was expecting an answer. I didn't know necessarily be that she was alive. I thought the answer might be that she's definitively dead. But I'm not surprised that we got an answer on it. And I don't have an issue with it on it personally.
I was really surprised we got an answer. And to be perfectly blunt, perfectly honest, I probably would have been happier if the answer we got was that she's dead. I think it's the answer that she's alive sort of didn't sit right with me. But that's just my personal take on it. I know some other people really wanted her to be alive. And I was just talking to a friend of mine before I watched this episode who was like, Laurie has to be alive. So he's probably very happy. And that's fine. I just personally think, like, I didn't definitively 100% think she was dead. I just think it was open to interpretation. I thought it would have been better had they kept it open to interpretation rather than answering. But that's just me. It was still a good episode. I still liked it.
Yeah, I didn't have strong feelings either way, one way or the other. I wasn't like, oh, I hope she's still alive, or oh, well, she has to be dead. Which there are people who are on both sides of that. I was not on either side. I wasn't strong feelings either way. Like I don't know. I didn't have a problem with it.
I still think it was and I love the way, what I love about season 3 is because it seems this way even more so than other seasons, although there's definitely a theme throughout the entire show, is that every episode is sort of follows a different character, and depending on which character you follow, it has a different tone, a different feel to it. And like the Matt episodes are always sort of more adventurous and upbeat and crazy, and the Lori episodes are always really dreary and sort of depressing. And I kind of like that. And I think that's even more noticeable in season 3.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Yeah.
And the Nora episodes have their own feel. It's hard for me to put into words, but there's definitely a feel there for the Nora episodes as well. But yeah, just really quick, just want to get your thoughts on the Matt episode. It's a Matt world, because when we did our last discussions right before this episode aired, we were both really worried that it was sucking because we both hated the season 2 Matt episode so much. And I think we both agree. We were both relieved with this episode. We both agree that it wasn't bad and it was actually good for a Matt episode. I wouldn't say, I would probably name it one of the weakest of the season, but it was still good. It was still great, and that just goes to show how great the season was, that I could name a good episode like this as the weaker point of the season.
But the scene for me, the scene between Matt and quote unquote God was phenomenal.
Like, yes, that's what I totally agree with. That scene just totally blew me away and made the episode.
Yeah. I mean, that is, to me, is a definitive Matt scene, and the fact that it changed Matt forever. Like, it made him a completely different person than he's ever been for the entire series. That he's now able to go in later episodes and just go along with Nora and not try to stop her, not tell her God is wanting her to do this and that, and just being like, hey, I'm your brother and I'm here to support you. I mean, that is huge. Like, that was a huge leap for that character, and it worked. I mean, the way that it came about, I mean, that scene to me, especially after seeing what happens to that character later and how he changes, that scene is just absolutely brilliant. That scene makes the episode for me. And then the rest of the episode wasn't bad either. I mean, I do get the Frasier thing. I do understand that was getting a little bit out into the weird for just being weird's sake. I definitely understand the reservations there. To me, it didn't last as long. It wasn't as big of a part of it. Like the scene where they were trying to, you said his name, now you've become him. Like, little over the top, but it was short enough to me, and it was resolved easily enough where I was like, okay, all right, fine, whatever. So it didn't ruin the episode for me. So overall, it was that scene between Matt and David Burton that really makes it for me personally.
Yeah, just real quick in the chat, I want to address DM Duet 1, who must have missed the first half of our discussion, which is all good. You can go back and watch it again. Says, so with Lori being alive, does that cut the Nora being dead in the last episode theory? And the answer is yes, which we talked about in the first part of the discussion, which you can go back and watch. Is that in an article interview with Damon Lindelof, he definitively said that scene was meant to show in the finale that Lori is in fact alive, which shows us that we're in the real world and not some sort of parallel universe or afterlife. So that is the short answer. But getting back to the Matt thing, and oh wait, did you have something you wanted to say on that, Afkin?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, cool. So getting back to the Matt thing and the Frasier people, like, I wasn't bothered by the Frasier, like, the people. I was kind of annoyed by it because it reminded me too much of those people who hung outside of Miracle in season 2, which I hated those people so much. And they did sort of remind, why does Matt always have to interact with these crazy people? That seems to be great, but whatever. It didn't like hamper me too much. I was willing to go along with it. But what really bothered me, and why I probably maybe don't like the episode as much, is the one particular scene where they're like, "Oh, you said his name," because it just seems it seemed contrived. That's why we didn't like the first Matt episode, because it felt contrived. And the fact that Matt said, "Oh, Frasier," it seemed really fake. It seemed like, oh, we have to have him say Frasier so we can have this crazy scene, and they have this like dummy line, and they do this whole ritual. And it seems to me that I didn't buy that. It seems to me these people were more interested in fucking each other than they were in doing this stupid ritual with the stupid lion thing and pumping his semen out or whatever the hell they were doing. That's just, to me, that's the one like bad moment of the episode, but it didn't ruin the episode for me. I just think it was the one bad moment because I completely agree with you on the David Burton, Matt talking to God. That was phenomenal, and that totally saved the episode and made it great.
Well, yeah, what I was just talking about before, I was referring to that one specific scene. It was,
okay.
it didn't last long. They got it over with quickly, and I was like, okay, and it got back to the good stuff. So I was like, okay, sure, whatever. Also, it was very interesting to me. I mentioned this in my review that this is the only like crazy cult that predates the departure that they've ever had. Like usually it's like all, people, giant Gary Busey balloons and, of course, the Guilty Remnant and all those things, Holy Wayne, all of that stuff is as a result of the departure. So to me, it's interesting that they were introducing this crazy cult that was unaffected by the departure. They existed before the departure. They're still there after the departure.
Yeah.
So that was the one aspect of that whole thing that I found interesting, that they're finally showing us, hey, there's some crazy people that were crazy before the departure, and they're still crazy. So, that was the one interesting aspect of that group of people to me.
Yeah, and like I said in my review, we got all sorts of cults and throughout the entire show. So why not a sex cult? And breaks things up again, makes things different. And it was interesting in the article hearing Damon Lindelof talk about how they came up with this idea in the first place, and saying that they knew they wanted to have a cult of like a sex cult of people like having sex, and they knew they wanted David Burton to be killed by a lion. So they took those two things and they came in, they found out about Frasier, so then they came up with a way of integrating this lion with the sex cult. And I think it worked. I think it was actually really good.
So the whole thing came about because they really wanted David Burton to be killed by a lion.
yeah, basically.
Interesting.
Because they thought there was something. It was like biblical metaphors and stuff.
Right.
Him calling himself God and whatever. But I just want. Cardinal Doomsday in the chat says there was a really dodgy accent in the Frasier tribe, which surprises me because it was filmed in Australia. So you think that they would have all Australian actors, and I think for the most part they did. But I suppose I don't know. They got someone to fake an accent. That does surprise me a little bit. But that's what I just in general I love about The Leftovers, is that in general they like a lot of like Lost will go to all these different countries around the world, but it's all filmed in Hawaii. But The Leftovers will actually, if it takes place in Texas, they're going to move production to Texas. If it takes place in Australia, they're going to film in Australia, and that's I think is what makes the show even better. Cool. All right. So I think we can sort of wrap up this discussion here, and sort of wrap up with I know we've kind of talked about this already, so we can just give our really quick thoughts on the season as a whole overall. And I'll start, and I'll say that I'm happy with season 3. I love that. I think it is the most consistently good season of The Leftovers, and it will be one of my favorite seasons of all time. I think it's different in a way from the other seasons, in which I think, even though you did have, like in season 1 and 2, you had a Nora episode, you had a Matt episode, but I think season 3 in particular is like every episode was sort of a different tone, different flavor, different focus. And it's funny because in the same interview with Lindelof, he talked about how it wasn't necessarily their intention to do 10 episodes originally, but they were told, when they were told by HBO they were getting a 3rd season, they were told they were getting 8 episodes. And he was like, that's not something you argue with. You say thank you and do the 8 episodes. And he also mentioned that had they had a chance to do 10 episodes, that they might have done a Jill and Tommy episode. They might have done a John episode in order to wrap those characters up as well. And it's a bit of a disappointment that they didn't get a chance to do it, because I do feel like Jill and Tommy were shortchanged, especially Jill, and season 3, because she was such a big part of season 1. But we mentioned earlier that their storylines were pretty much wrapped up because they're okay, so it kind of makes sense that we didn't get to see them. But it would have been nice. But it's still, I don't think that hurts the season at all. I still think it's a great season. I think the theme of having the end of the world and then dealing with the fact that it's not actually going to end was really well executed, and ending it on an ambiguous note, even if it wasn't as ambiguous as I was hoping for, was still a great, perfect way to end the Leftovers. So I think it is definitely a great season. Even though I say season 2 is slightly better, I still think I was still highly impressed with season 3.
Yeah, well, as I said, I think season 3 was the best season. Not only, but each episode had a different tone, focused on a different character, and yet they all tied. I loved how they tied each episode into the next. Even though you have one episode about Kevin Sr., our previous episode was about Nora, the episode after that is about Kevin and Nora, and yet they all tie into each other beautifully. And then you tie that one into the Matt episode, and the Matt episode into the Lori episode, and how they it was just so beautifully constructed and beautifully woven together this whole season. I can't think of very many, if any, really, seasons of any show that really were able to weave things together so perfectly. And while there wasn't 100% perfect, I can't say there were 0 flaws in it. I don't think you can ever do an entire season of 8 episodes or more of any show where it's going to be no mistakes, because it's made by humans. So there's going to be some flaws in it. But it's as close to perfect to me as any season I've ever seen. So to me, I have to just put a big black mark on season 2 because of the Matt episode, and there's nothing equivalent of that in season 3. So to me, season 3 overall is better, and I think I as far as what's better between International Assassin and the Most Powerful Man in the World, you said you actually think Most Powerful Man in the World is better. I think they're very on par. I think one was good for season 2, one was more fitting for season 3, because the characters are in different places. So I think, there's nothing in season 2 that really just overpowers season 3 for me. So season 3 of The Leftovers, I don't know where it would rank exactly, but it would be pretty high on my list of all-time seasons. Probably not number 1, but it would be up there. So I can't say enough about the season. I can't say enough about the ending and the character resolutions. I did actually, I don't know if you saw my page, Mark, there were some people who just went on there to bitch about how they hated the ending, and because they didn't get the answers they wanted and all of this stuff. But I mean, my response to that is, if you were looking for these answers, then you were looking for the wrong thing. You were watching the wrong show, because they weren't out to give you the answers. It was about the characters. This is what Damon Lindelof said Lost was, except it wasn't. This time, it really was about the characters, and the character stories were resolved in a beautiful way. So it was just very satisfying. So just a great season, great ending. Great show.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I think, I don't know if you agree with me, but I think The Leftovers, it actually inspired me maybe to do this video where I do the top 10 most underrated shows of all time, in which The Leftovers, I think, would be clear number 1. I think this is the most underrated show of all time. I think so, and I didn't hear about those. I didn't notice those people going to your page to bitch about the ending and how it's unsatisfying, but I have seen a few of those comments on the internet, and I'm frankly surprised by it. And I did get a comment on the Leftovers discussion announcement before this video saying, "Oh, what's to discuss? The show sucked." But I don't know. So I guess maybe it's not for everyone. Maybe that's not why it was as popular as I think it should have been. But I still say that this is the most underrated show of all time, and is one of the best shows of all time. I don't know what your feelings on that is.
Oh, I agree. And I could name a couple of shows that are more highly rated than it, that this is better than by far, but I'm just going to start huge arguments, and people are going to be like, "What's wrong with you? No, you're wrong." And they'll be like, "Oh, Westworld! Oh, Westworld!"
I knew that's what you're going.
But yeah, I mean, I can name some shows that this is far vastly superior to, that are way highly rated. Not just that one, but other shows. But again, it's opinion. I mean, it's all about opinion. But this is just my opinion that this is, I mean, definitely the most underrated show right now of all time. But maybe, who knows? Maybe it'll pick up a cult following over time. Maybe people start picking up on it through the years. You never know.
Yeah, that happens with a lot of shows, because I think it's definitely a niche show that doesn't appeal to everyone, which a lot of my favorite movies are like that, actually, that a lot of people don't like because it appeals to a sort of niche audience, but it really speaks to me. And I do think it is a possibility that will gain more traction over time, because a lot of shows have after they went off the air. And I am so pleased that they actually got that Lindelof did decide to end the show here, because a lot of people were like, are really upset. A lot of people are whinging, like, who love the show, saying, "I'm so upset it's over. I wish there was a season 4. I'm glad that there wasn't, because the show could have gotten canceled. If they would have left open a possibility for season 4, then it could have been the show got canceled." In fact, this is another thing I read, maybe not in this interview, but another interview, that Lindelof said that the Mark Lombardo, or the HBO executive, was saying, maybe consider the possibility of leaving the possibility for season 4 open. And Lindelof was like, "No, I'd rather not, because I want to end the show definitively. So if we don't get a season 4, we want to have a clear ending." And I'm so pleased that they did it. I think they landed, like we said, having the conclusion, the ending with Nora and Kevin's character stories concluded. And I love that we got that.
Yeah, me too. And they ended it in a way where there could be no season 4. And I think that is, I really appreciate that. I mean, there was always the chance that they didn't know they were going to get season 3, so it could have ended at season 2, and you would be like, "Oh, okay, well, that could be kind of an ending," but it wasn't really the ending. So I love that he decided to do that. That I want to end this on my own terms. We want to have an ending the way I want it to end, and there's no doubt, there's no room for season 4, and I love that. I mean, it's so much better than an ending where it's like, it kind of could have been an ending, but it kind of couldn't have been, like if they had ended on season 2. I like this so much better. So I'm glad that he made that choice.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Cool. So I think we'll wrap up the discussion here. I want to thank everyone for joining in the chat. And Cardinal Doomsday, good to see you all as always. DM Duet1, thanks for joining. Good to hear your comments. You can go back and check out the first part of the discussion and answer some of your questions. And thank you for anyone who's watching this in archives after the fact. Thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for checking out all my leftover reviews for throughout the season. If you haven't, you can go back and watch them. And also, fans of Akton Tamko, checked out his channel as well. Thank you so much for doing so. And of course, Akton, thank you for joining me. Of course, it's always great to have here and have someone who also loves this great show and talk about it. So before we go, any sort of plugs you want to do? What's going on with Akton Tamko?
Yeah, check out Akton Tamko's channel. I'm pretty in a lull right now. I've just finished my leftovers reviews. Don't have a whole lot of new stuff going on until between now and to the time Game of Thrones season 7 premieres, but I'll have some things here and there, and you can still check out all the stuff I got in the archives, all of my Game of Thrones trailer reviews, my predictions and stuff like that. And if you haven't seen all my leftover reviews, check those out too, because I reviewed every episode of this season. I did a season 2 rewatch, a season 1 rewatch. So yeah, please check out my channel, and I hope to see you soon.
Cool, yeah, and on Enchantment of Eternity, I have some stuff brewing with Star Trek, which I'll make an announcement for tomorrow. More Star Trek reviews are coming, so if you're into Star Trek, keep you open for that. And of course, I could be doing more Game of Thrones stuff as we lead up to Game of Thrones season 7, which is a great thing. And I'll do reviews here and there for Orphan Black, Dark Matter, which both just started. So I'll check in with those 2 shows. So if you watch those shows, you can check out my channel for those as well. And yeah, thank you so much for checking this out, and we'll see you next time.